Thank you for your patience. Before commencing the seminar proceedings today, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which Parliament House sits and pay respects to elders past and present. Thank you. Also want to welcome you to the Victorian chapter of the Australasian Study of Parliament Group's first seminar for 2025, and to assure you that we have some really interesting topics coming up for the rest of the year. So we hope to see you all here with each seminar. We're very fortunate today to have two eminent speakers. The first is Sven Bluemmel, who is the Commissioner of the Independent, Impartial Statutory Authority, the Victorian Electoral Commission. The VEC, in my opinion, and I'm sure in Sven's as well, is really one of the foundation stones of the Victorian political system. And I think Sven is going to address that issue today and sort of highlight the importance of VECs and other electoral commissions to the proper functioning of a democracy. Our second speaker is Associate Professor Yee-Fui Ng, who is a highly respected expert in public integrity. I'm just going to carry on, talk louder. In the public integrity space, and her publications actually have impact on the whole issue of public sector integrity. This evening, Yee-Fui will be talking about the issues raised in her latest report, which she did for the Susan McKinnon Foundation. And the report is titled Truth in Political Advertising Laws, and Design, Operation, Effectiveness and Recommendations for Reform. And I've read the report, and I urge you all to please go and read it. It's written in a very readable fashion, but it makes very important points, again, for our democracy. Sven and Yee-Fui will each speak for approximately 12 to 15 minutes, followed by a few questions from me, and then, of course, questions from the audience. And hopefully there'll be plenty of time for all the interesting questions I know you want to ask. So could you please join me in welcoming our distinguished speakers? And I invite Sven to please come up first.
Thank you very much, Colleen, and thank you to the ASPG for inviting me to be here today. It's always a pleasure. I've been a member for many years. I think it's a wonderful organisation, and I'm always happy to participate. I hope you'll find tonight a stimulating discussion, as I'm sure you will. I'll be talking about the role of independent electoral commissions in our democracy. And of course, in my case, I'll be talking through the lens of the Victorian Electoral Commission itself. Now, about the VEC, as Colin's already mentioned, we are an independent, impartial statutory office. In fact, my office is also protected by the Constitution Act itself. And what I'd like to do to get us in the right headspace is to talk about the vision and mission of the VEC. So currently, the vision is all Victorians actively participating in their democracy. That's our vision. And it's very deliberately broad, but very deliberately active. It doesn't actually just talk about elections. And one of the things that I'll highlight is that there is much more to a modern electoral management body like the VEC than elections. Elections are the core of it, no doubt, but they are part of a bigger and more complex picture. In terms of the mission, it is to deliver high-quality, accessible electoral services with innovation, integrity, and independence. Now, when I talk about that issue of it's broader than elections and it's broader than is often considered, you sometimes see this. You have one job, and that's usually what is said when something goes wrong. You have one job, and that job is to deliver the election. I'd like everyone to sort of take that with a grain of salt next time you hear it, because here is what we do. Yes, we run a major election every 2 years. I'll talk about two of those. The two are every 4 years we have a state parliamentary election, general parliamentary election, and in the in-between 2 years, so 2 years after a state election, we run local government elections. Of course, we had local government elections in October last year. I hope you all voted. If you didn't, you probably got something from me in the last 3 weeks saying you appear to have failed to vote. Do you have an explanation? We sent out about 460,000 of those. And as you can imagine, that's from an October election from last year. Okay, so the tail of an election for us is very, very long. State elections, council elections. We do by-elections. We do parliamentary by-elections. We do local council by-elections. We do countbacks, for example, for upper house vacancies and for multi-council awards in local government where there is a vacancy. Other elections and polls, most of those are quite small. Electoral enrolment, of course, we do that all the time. Constantly. There will be people who are enrolling to vote for the first time today. There are people who are changing their enrolment today. That doesn't just happen when there's an election on, it happens all the time, which is healthy. We do education and engagement, very, very important to us. As Colleen said, the importance of the VEC and what it does to our political system is in one way reflected in the legitimacy of the government that is voted in to be the government of the day. The more that is universally respected, the more we have people engaged in the process, even with compulsory voting, of course, which I think we're very fortunate to have. We can always do more. We never have a 100% turnout rate. We want to get as close to that as possible. The more we do that, the more legitimate is the outcome of the election, the more legitimate is the government that is then charged with executing its policies. Compulsory voting enforcement, I've already mentioned that. That takes many, many months after an election. Funding and disclosure. In Victoria, like many other places, we have funding and disclosure laws. That is laws for disclosure of political donations. That's quite complex, as you can imagine. That runs 365 days a year. There are highlights and reporting periods, but ultimately our work on that is constant. Funding, we have public funding for elections in Victoria. That means that candidates who achieve a certain level of success, either by being voted in or by achieving more than 4% of the primary vote, will receive public funding. We have to administer that. That's year-round, 4 years in between elections. Registered political parties. We register and sometimes deregister political parties. We deal with their changes of name, changes of logo, and so on. Boundary redivisions. Not very frequent, thankfully, but it is going to happen again fairly soon, not before the next election, though. And similarly, local government representation reviews. There were substantial changes in local government boundaries, structures, etc. We administered all of that, and we undertake research. So if it's one job, it's pretty complex, and it doesn't start and stop with elections. Our legislative framework, the Electoral Act, Local Government Act, various regulations, City of Melbourne Act, and regulations, infringements, Local Government Amendment, Governance Integrity Bill from last year, and as I've already mentioned, the Constitution itself. So we have a fairly complex web of legislation that we administer. What I want to do now is just take you behind the scenes of an election, because we see the difference between people who have worked in an election and those who have not. And universally from people who have worked in an election, the comment I always hear is, my God, I had no idea how complex, I had no idea how many checks and balances, I had no idea how much scrutiny there is, I had no idea how much prep work there is. That's what we always hear. So I want to take you behind the scenes of an election, 2 elections particularly. So, preparing for the elections. We have been for many, many months been preparing for the next state election, which I'm sure you all know is on the 28th of November 2026. So it still seems like quite a way away. We're not just planning for that election, we are undertaking work on that election right now, negotiating contracts, service agreements, finding suitable venues. We're already securing our property footprint for the 2026 November elections. If you can imagine, we're going to have in the order of about 1,800 physical places. So for us to gear up for that, it's the equivalent of creating from scratch a Fortune 500 company in time for that, to be fully productive for that period, and then close it down. And we do that every time we run an election. It's often just not appreciated. So the web of contracts behind that is enormous. Security testing, we are a huge target of attack, of cyber attacks and so on. Risk assessments, business continuity planning. We have to recruit a workforce. Our election casual workforce for a state election is about 21,000 people. They all have to be found, they have to be retained, they have to be paid, they have to be trained, and they have to be supervised. And we have to make sure that they are all acting impartially. It's a huge, huge job. Resources for candidates. We want to make it as easy as possible for candidates and parties to participate. Remember our vision, every Victorian participating actively in their democracy. That's not just voters, that's candidates, that's parties, that's their supporters, that's their campaigners. It's all of that. We've got to make it easy for them as well. We undertake dress rehearsals before an election to make sure everything works. We test new systems, procedures and processes. It is huge. We're doing that now. I just want to show you a short video that just looks behind the scenes as well. I'll leave this with you. It's quite short.
Delivering an election is a significant undertaking. From printing millions of ballot papers, assisting voters, to counting every single vote. Delivering elections ensures every Victorian has their say. In October 2024, we ran the local council elections, followed by 2 district by-elections in February 2025. Let's take a closer look at the scale and impact of the elections. Every vote shapes Victoria's future and strengthens our democracy. From planning to final results, our teams work tirelessly to deliver smooth, transparent and fair elections.
And the level of scrutiny is something, again, that almost shocks people once they see it. That every journey of that ballot paper is subject to scrutiny. It's one of the real strengths of our system. I won't go through all the stats. You heard a fair bit about that. Just a couple of highlights. On the numbers you saw there, about 4,000 electoral casuals. That was for the local government elections. As I said, it's about 21,000 for state elections. To give you an idea, 2,200 candidates. I think last year when the people were eagerly awaiting the results of the local council elections, they were saying, well, how can the US do X million people for a presidential election and do it so quickly, and why do we have to wait so long for local council elections? How many candidates can you think of that were running for president in the US? Now, most people will think 2. I think there were actually 24 all up when you do all the individual ones in individual states and so forth, but there were 2. We had 2,200 candidates. Okay, so very, very different kind of voting. So last one there, 4 million pencils. Interesting little factoid. Years ago, we used to hire someone who drilled little holes in the pencils to attach the string to tie them to the thing. So that was more expensive than the cost of losing a pen. Or pencil, rather. So please don't steal them. I'm not encouraging you to do that. But you look at something and you go, we can save some cost and money here. It's public money that we're spending, so we try and save whatever we can. So that's why we no longer drill holes in pencils. But please, be kind. Anyone who doesn't trust pencils, bring your own pen. It's not a problem. Does anyone know why we don't use pens? They dry out between elections. Pencils don't. That's it. Simple as that. Right. That's our warehouse. It's out at the airport. As you can imagine there, I won't show you, but we have time-lapse videos of things going in and out there. Thousands of deliveries. We have, during the election period, we have semi-trailers going out around the clock pretty much. We have in Victoria the shortest time frame from writ to deliver an election. That means that as soon as the ballot draw is done, we have printing presses across Victoria and New South Wales running 24/7 for about 4 days in order to be able to be ready for early voting. We've got the tightest timeframes in all of Australia. Okay, out of the 3 major presses we had running at state election 2022 by our contractors, 2 of them broke down. I'll let you figure out what the impact of that is. And yet, we managed to be ready on day 1 for early voting. We package things up for voting resources, voting centre resources and so on. As I said, we stand up about 1,800 small businesses across Victoria for an election from scratch. Okay, we walk in, bare floor, bare walls, set up an office that works on day 1, and then we pack it all down, and then we do it all again. Some local government facts and figures. I won't go through that. You saw that in the video. But what I'll talk about now, my sort of last sort of major point, is electoral integrity. The electoral environment within which we operate now is utterly unforgiving. We see that now pretty much whenever there is an election. It's utterly unforgiving, and we have to cope with that. We just have to keep delivering time and time again. On the integrity side of things, there's a lot of misinformation, disinformation, artificial intelligence, deepfakes. We all know that. Everyone's seen the discussion about that. Obviously, what we do is we set ourselves up as the trusted source of facts on this, so people can come to our website or our other channels and say, well, this is where you go for the demonstrably, factually correct truth. That's a tautology. We address rumours. Oh my God, rumours. I'll have a couple of examples shortly. But the amount of mis and disinformation and rumours, there is a huge appetite out there for everything that happens to be seen through a conspiratorial lens. And we have to deal with that. We've got an ongoing regulatory function. As I said, it's not just election delivery where we have to worry about this. We have to deal with that all the time. We have public funding, donation disclosure, party registration, and we have to do that all the time. Some of you may have heard in the recent Werribee by-election something about a flood. You may not have. Put it this way. We got reports from the field, from one of our voting centres, that said we might have a problem with a leak. Okay, and then the media contacts us and says, we've heard that there's a ceiling leak, then we've heard there's a roof leak, then it's a roof collapse, and then we had an inquiry saying, what about the flood at the Werribee voting centre? And we just thought, well, that's a bit strange, because here's what it actually was. It was 2/3 of one ceiling tile that had a pipe in the ceiling that was dripping slowly. It got wet, it fell down, we put bollards around it, and we kept going. That was the flood. So this is what we're dealing with now. And this is what we will deal with all the time. Another thing we will deal with is... may they rest in peace. But they, I mean, according to the reports, you might have thought that the office was swept into Port Phillip Bay. Another thing that rears its head, I think, now every election, I really feel for this person in the video, I don't know who they are, is this. Some of you may have seen this. Every time there's an election in Australia now, on social media, this video does the rounds, and it says, look, it's a AEC, VEC, Queensland, whatever, whichever the election is, it's one of their people who's erasing votes and changing them. What this actually shows is a New South Wales employee who is completing their paperwork when they're signing in as an election worker, as an election casual. There's no ballots anywhere near here. Okay, this is paperwork for signing in a timesheet or something along those sorts of lines. And again, it gets rolled out every time. I really feel for this person. I don't know who he is, but he is now the face of this sort of conspiracy theory, which is really, really depressing. I'll wrap up by saying, what's our best defense against mis and disinformation? There are bits we can do. There's regulation, there's technology, that, the good bots fighting the bad bots, all of those sorts of things. Yeah, they're all part of a solution, but none of that will get anywhere near addressing it. The one thing I think that has the biggest role to play is an informed, sophisticated electorate. It's what a military planner would call target hardening, because you can't stop the weapons, but you can make your target harder to hurt. And that's what we can do through making sure that our fellow citizens, our children, grandchildren, that they know that they are sophisticated and they know about our system. So improving education, civics, etc. is absolutely important. Does all of this matter? As I said, yes, it does, in my opinion, because obviously everything rests on this. Everything rests on the electoral system. All of the great policies that someone wishes to implement in government, all of that rests on legitimacy, and legitimacy rests on trusted and therefore trustworthy electoral processes, and that's what the VEC is here for. I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yee-Fui. If you would like to come up and present, thank you.
Okay, good evening, everyone. So it's a pleasure to be here today, and this is one of the most colorful talks I've given, with bells disrupting it and protesters shouting outside. And yes, this is great, in this great room. So I'm going to talk today about truth in political advertising. And thanks to Colleen for plugging the report commissioned by the Susan McKinnon Foundation. Thank you. So in recent times, there have been very significant concerns about disinformation being peddled to political parties, by political parties, to influence electoral outcomes in their favor. A salutary example is the online campaign of misinformation by then President Trump, still President Trump, who falsely claimed that the 2020 presidential election had been stolen. This led to Trump's supporters storming the US Capitol building on the 6th of January 2021, resulting in 5 deaths. Anyway. So in Australia, both major political parties have accused each other of disinformation, such as the Mediscare campaign by the Labor in the 2016 federal election, and the death tax campaign by the Liberal Party in the 2019 federal election. And as we know, we are coming up to a federal election. They have to announce it soon. Probably it will happen in May. So this spread of disinformation has become prevalent in an era of fake news and alternate facts, exacerbated as well by the rise of social media. The spread of disinformation in an electoral campaign, and we've seen a few examples given by Sven, it undermines the public's ability to make informed choices in casting their vote. and is detrimental to electoral integrity and democratic processes. In 2024, the World Economic Forum's annual Global Risk Report ranked misinformation and disinformation as the most severe risk facing the world over the next 2 years. The recent US election probably has not helped that very much. So one mechanism for regulating disinformation is to introduce truth in political advertising laws. These laws would ban inaccurate and misleading statements of fact that seek to influence the outcome of an election. Truth in political advertising laws have existed in South Australia for the last 39 years and have more recently been introduced in the ACT, and they had their first go at it in their last election last year. The Commonwealth introduced a Truth in Political Advertising bill in late 2024, but that failed to pass without the support of the opposition. The donations bill did pass, though, that's something. So by prohibiting disinformation in elections, the main goal of truth in political advertising laws is to protect the integrity of the electoral process, to curtail the potential manipulation of voters at the individual level, and to prevent the campaign debate from being skewed in irrelevant directions. In South Australia and the ACT, truth in political advertising laws are administered by the Electoral Commissioner. If the Electoral Commission determines the material is false or misleading to a material extent, it will order a withdrawal and retraction. I know Sven has opinions as to whether the Electoral Commissioner should be the one to enforce the laws. And so in the Commonwealth Bill put enforcement in the hands of an electoral communications panel, set up as an independent statutory structure within the Australian Electoral Commission, and that would comprise 3 to 13 members, chaired by a retired judge. So this is a mechanism to provide a buffer to the Electoral Commission and therefore protect its independence and impartiality, while being able to draw on the Electoral Commission's substantial resources and expertise. We all love our Electoral Commission here, and we know it's a bulwark for our democracy. So importantly, the laws would be confined to policing false or misleading statements of fact. And that means that parties and other political players would still be free to express their opinions, and freedom of speech would not be impeded. So one question is, why should we regulate truth in elections? So spreading political lies can cause harms on multiple fronts. The first is the damage to the candidate or the political party in terms of reputation or electoral prospects by all these attack ads. The second danger is the danger to the integrity of the electoral process if lies cause people to switch their votes, and at an aggregate level, it might be able to change electoral outcomes. Proponents of free speech tend to oppose truth in political advertising laws on the basis that freedom of expression provides a self-correcting process where false statements are soon corrected by public discussion. That is, you counter bad speech with good speech. However, there are several difficulties with this self-correcting argument. For one, it assumes that the person making the false statements and the respondent to those statements have an equal communicative power, and they have the same soapbox and will reach the same audiences, which will very rarely be the case. Another issue with this self-correcting argument is that people can still be manipulated in the short term during an election campaign, and false statements made close to the election date may not have the opportunity to be rebutted and corrected before the election. Legislative intervention is also justified due to the inadequacy of other regulatory mechanisms, such as market regulation. Markets are ineffective regulators of information because consumer demand unconsciously tends to the consumption of news that confirms their existing prejudices, and consumers are not always equipped to sift and ascertain the truth of the information. Digital platforms like Facebook, Meta, Twitter/X, they benefit financially from misinformation, disinformation, and other harmful content spreading very widely on their sites and services. And they, in fact, have the incentive to amplify such behavior for profit, rather than to curb disinformation. This suggests that leaving things to the market will be insufficient to combat disinformation in elections. In the Australian context, truth in political advertising laws may be justified specifically because of compulsory voting, which we also love, in addition to the Electoral Commission. So compulsory voting arguably places a special duty on the state to ensure that voting doesn't place an unreasonable burden on citizens. And this includes combating false election information, which then elevates the information cost of voting. There is very little justification for allowing political parties to lie while banning corporations from engaging in misleading or deceptive conduct. As former South Australian Premier Mike Rann has argued, why should consumers and shareholders be protected from fraudulent and dishonest claims, but not electors? Why don't you want electors to be able to make their judgments and cast their votes on the basis of facts and truthful arguments rather than deliberate falsehoods? Another question is, are truth in political advertising laws effective? My report that I mentioned before analyzes the operation and effectiveness of truth in political advertising laws in South Australia and the ACT. And my findings are based on interviews with 34 current and former premiers, ministers, members of parliaments, party directors, secretaries, electoral commissioners, and civil society organizations. My interviews have revealed that truth in political advertising laws have undoubtedly changed the face of electoral campaigning, certainly in South Australia. Political party state directors or secretaries work closely with the Premier and lawyers to ensure the wording of their political ads is accurate. There is a huge disincentive for political parties to be found to be inaccurate and misleading by the Electoral Commissioner, as the reputational damage for parties deemed to be misleading is significant. The media expose the outcomes of Electoral Commissioner decisions very prominently. As former South Australian Premier Jay Weatherill noted, every day during election campaigns is important, and for you to lose one of those days through an adverse finding within a 4-week election campaign, because an adverse finding of that sort is going to receive public notoriety. And if that doesn't lead the news that night, it will be a major story. That will tend to have a negative impact on your momentum that you try to build in an election campaign. So it's really something to avoid. And both political parties do take it seriously. My report also shows that there is very strong support for these laws in South Australia and the ACT by the political establishment. Most of the political participants are very positive about truth in political advertising laws, and they consider that they work well in their jurisdiction. As former South Australian Attorney General Chris Sumner said, who introduced the legislation, if you can't rely on facts in a democracy for voters to be able to make a decision about particular parties or policy issues, then democracy is demeaned. Political participants agree that truth in political advertising laws have curbed the most egregious lies in political ads and have also created a political culture where telling the truth is the norm. My findings have also debunked major concerns about truth in political advertising laws. It finds that these laws do not chill free speech, and the South Australian Electoral Commission's reputation for impartiality remains untarnished by administering these laws for the past 39 years. There are, however, indications that truth in political advertising laws have increasingly been used as a political tool in the last 2 South Australian elections, where each political party has put in multiple complaints to bog the other side down. And when they get an electoral commissioner determination, they go on TV with the letter saying, this party has lied to you. So there has been increased politicization of the laws. Another thing is that truth in political advertising laws may not adequately deal with matters such as disinformation using artificial intelligence, including deepfakes. And this is because the laws were drafted 39 years ago. They're drafted in an era of, what did they have back then? Telegraphs, talkback radio, and then televisions. And now we've moved on to social media. So times have changed, and we might need to look at updating these laws to reflect the modern realities of our modern communication, including AI. To conclude, the OECD has noted the rapid and global spread of mis- and disinformation, which has presented a fundamental risk to free and fact-based exchange of information, underpinning democratic debate. Truth in political advertising laws have successfully operated in South Australia for 39 years, and they have the support of the politicians, party officials, and the electoral commissioners. These laws are narrow in ambit, being confined to statements of facts that can be proven to be wrong, but they are also constitutional and compliant with our implied freedom of political communication protected by our Constitution. They are also enforceable by the Electoral Commissioner, as we have seen. False information can alter elections, affect voter participation, silence minorities, and polarize our electorate. It is time to reform our electoral laws to mitigate the significant dangers to our democratic system. So thank you very much. I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you both for 2 excellent presentations. I'm just going to make a couple of brief comments and forego my opportunity to ask questions, because I'm sure there's going to be questions from the floor and I've got to keep an eye on time. The one thing I thought from both of the presentations that sort of went through my mind, Sven, I thought I knew something about how the Electoral Commission operated. I clearly didn't know anything very much, and I was just overwhelmed by how much you have to do at such a high level constantly was the thing that I just kept on thinking, wow. So I don't envy you your position, but I do admire it. Yee-Fui, as you were talking, I kept on thinking something I've thought, I think, for a long time, and your report makes it very clear. But how can our members of Parliament pass laws that do not allow any of this deception to take place at a business level or probably in levels of the public sector? But it's okay if you're sort of out there trying to gain election. It's okay then not to be truthful. And the fact that we're even discussing the need for that legislation, really, it's about time that parliaments around the world, the members of Parliament, did something about it. But I'm going to open up, the one other thing is the most important thing that came through from both your presentations combined, that trust is actually at the basic core of our respect for our political systems. And thank you both for trying to do everything you possibly can to ensure that trust. I'm going to ask people from the audience for questions. I do ask, as I always do, that you only ask one question, no double barrel or just an add-on or anything like that, just one question per person. And then if only one person wants to ask a question, they can have another go. But also, given we're of time, we can't afford for a long speech before the questions coming. But please don't be shy. Don't be shy to be the first person to put up your hand, because there's some really great opportunities here. So who would like to start? Right, thank you, the gentleman.
Thank you. Thank you both for your presentations. My experience working inside political parties is that they're very, very good at working in and around rules to extract the best possible outcome for them. In the South Australian context, what tricks have the parties got up to get around those rules? Have they, for example, rather than saying Labor believes X, have they said, oh, John said Labor believes X, and therefore kind of subverted the intention of those rules?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and you're quite right. I have talked to the political parties, and they do have lots of tricks up their sleeves. The wording of the ads, they do actually pore over every single word, and they get lawyers to look over it. So that's the good side of things. They actually do make a very strong and concerted effort that their ads are as accurate as possible. The naughty side of things is that they have found out that they can bog down the other party by throwing, lots and lots of vexatious complaints at the Electoral Commissioner, and then the Electoral Commissioner goes to the other party and asks, about evidence about those ads. And so it takes up the party's directors or state secretaries' time. And that's, a more recent thing we've seen in the last 2 elections. Another thing is that the Electoral Commissioner in South Australia requires that retractions be posted on the same forum. So if it's a social media post, the retraction with the wording given by the Electoral Commissioner has to be posted on social media as well. But you can see parties try to sort of skate around this by putting ads, if they put a TV ad on prime time, their retraction will be at midnight or something. They try to bury the retraction. So I think that there needs to be tightening in that respect of the retraction requirements, requiring an equivalence. If the social media post is posted and boosted, the retraction also has to be boosted at the same level.
Any other questions? Yes, Julia, just one question.
Much of the information that's disinformation is both generated by and spread by AI and bots. They're not people. And I'm just wondering what the capacity for including in legislation some capacity to ban non-people, or who are also non-voters materially, from participating in, at least in the electoral advertising process, but perhaps even a bit more than that.
I'm happy to start off in Victoria and in most Australian jurisdictions. The only sort of real requirement about that in an electoral space is that it has to be properly authorised. Now, there's nothing. Well, that's right. So, what is the incentive there for? And often it's not necessarily the core legitimate participant, like the candidate, the party, or even an associated entity, who's responsible for some of those bot-generated and spread materials. I mean, we know for a fact that international actors often do that, and they're even further from our reach. So you raise a very important point. And if there were laws to ban that sort of thing, it would be very, very difficult to enforce it. The only sort of players you could really go after would be the owners or controllers of the platforms. So that would be an angle. That's just my observation.
Yeah, I might add to that. So in the US, there is a bill about banning malicious deepfakes in elections. So there have been some legislative attempts to ban deepfakes and AI in elections. We've seen sort of AI-generated content in terms of the U.S. elections, with Nancy Pelosi AI being used to slur her speech and make her look like she's drunk, and that's used as a basis to say she's not fit to be a speaker. So we already are seeing this quite troubling trend of using malicious deepfakes in election contexts, and there are beginning of attempts to try to ban this type of behavior. In the EU, it's not a ban, but a transparency measure. So if it's an AI-generated image, you're supposed to put up notice that say that this is made by AI. So that's another way of regulating, either banning the activity completely or to create more transparency. And if you know it's made by AI, then you get more careful about it. But as Sven said, there's an issue about enforcement, right? Because these are deliberate malicious actors who are not identifying themselves as, if it's a political party authorizing electoral material, it's quite easy to regulate. But if it's a malicious actor hiding their true identity, as you said, going for the social media platforms would be the next step. And that bill didn't pass because it had opposition in the Senate. So we're really struggling, I think, to regulate this information at a broader sense.
And that's why I sort of go back to my point earlier that whatever we can do to make our consumers or potential consumers of that information as sophisticated as possible, that will help. It's not going to, be a magic bullet, but I think it absolutely has to be part of the solution, because regulatory responses and technological responses, people can get around them often quite easily.
Education and engagement was one of the things that you had listed. If you could say this is the minimum I would like voters to know and to do before they pick up a ballot paper, what are those things? You'd be happy if everybody knew that.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I mean, the first, it even starts before they pick up the ballot paper. First thing I'd like them to know is that elections are free, are open to everyone who is eligible to be enrolled, so please enroll. Not everyone does enroll, but we have a very high rate in Australia, including in Victoria. For some people, of course, they might come from an environment where just showing up and being seen to vote is a dangerous thing. Now, we're incredibly lucky that that's not the case here, but old habits die hard if you come from that sort of environment all your life. So I'd like them to know that. Voting is safe. Voting is free. Voting is fair. Once we actually have them in the voting centre, I'd like them to know how to cast a valid formal vote, which again, the audience in this room, which dare I say is not broadly representative, I should say. There's a lot of knowledge in this room about these sort of processes. For us, it might be quite hard to comprehend how someone doesn't know how to fill out even a short Legislative Assembly ballot paper with 8 candidates on it. And we study this. We look at this after elections. We go through informal ballots and work out, right, what are people... There are some who are deliberately informal, of course, that's one thing, fine. But there are many others where someone seems to have made an attempt and it fell short. And we have very clear rules about what is required for a formal vote. So I'd like them to know that. So, and ultimately, what I'd love them to know, what I'd love all of us to know and remember, is that this matters. That this, yes, it's your obligation, but it's a wonderful right and privilege that we've got in this country to do this and to shape our future by deciding who we vote for and how we vote, whatever that is. If I could have everyone really, really appreciating that, I'd be very happy.
Yes, my question is to Sven, and it's the other end of the process, the vote counting. And we know from the history of the Legislative Council, occasionally it throws up someone who gets elected with a very tiny primary vote or primary vote. So, and that is part of the review which is being undertaken at the moment of the Legislative Council structure and functioning. I'm wondering what sort of research role do you think the Commission has dealing with issues like that, which are specialist technical issues which require a lot of deep research?
Yeah, it's you're quite right, of course, that the matter is currently before the Electoral Matters Committee to inquire into. So clearly that's a matter for the committee to progress. Where I see the role of the VEC in that sort of space is it's not for me or the VEC to express a view on what the structure of the upper house should be or whether, what sort of preference deals should or shouldn't be allowed or anything like that. To me, those are really valid policy debates to be had, but I don't think it's appropriate for me to put forward a preferred option in any shape or form. What I do see my role in that space as being is as the body that is the expert in administering elections under whatever system comes out of this, I have to make sure that I do whatever I can to ensure that the committee members, or the committee as a whole, is aware of the ramifications of whatever changes they might be proposing. And that's really practical in terms of how big is a ballot paper going to be if you're going to change the upper house structure, all of those kinds of things. What impact would it have on the complexity of the count, on the informality rate, depending on changes to the ballot paper, above, below the line, all of those sorts of things. I think it's fair for me to, it's not just fair, it's a duty I think I have to inform the committee of those ramifications, but the policy decision about, in light of all of those and many other considerations that are put to them by others, what the policy decision should be. That's, I think, as far as it goes for me. Are we allowing that? I'll quickly answer it. I'm being cheeky. Yes, we do look at those. So, for example, again, even something as practical that unless you've worked in an election, why would anyone know, is that there is a physical limit of scanning machines, of the size of what you can feed into a scanning machine, for example. Now, we don't currently use any scanning here, but if we had much bigger papers like that, we would. Or we would certainly look at it, of course. And the last thing you would want is to have a ballot paper and then as you're preparing your count, you realise that there's not a scanner on the market that could scan that. And before you know it, you've got a huge, huge problem. So we look at that all the time, absolutely, yeah.
Okay, oh yes, right. No, you're right, no problem.
As you know very well, probably in the last couple of weeks, there's been lots of scrutiny around the institution of commissions, whether it's the leakage of in Werribee or what's going on in WA. And I find it pretty interesting because as someone who works in the space for many years, the profile of the commissions generally is very highly regarded in Australia, the role that they have and so on. So that kind of change of narrative, that level of scrutiny is quite new as a narrative around the institutions. I just wanted to understand whether you have been able to interpret that kind of narrative, what's going on and why there is this kind of like new narrative about commissions generally.
Yeah, it's and that goes to sort of that word I used earlier. It's unforgiving. It's just unforgiving now. And in terms of, say, the Werribee by-election and the Prahran by-election, there is currently an inquiry that's been referred from the House to the Electoral Matters Committee to look into those. So obviously I don't want to go into what they're going to look at. I'm assuming that, well, we'll provide a submission. I'll clearly be available for appearance at the committee's absolute discretion. But but broadly speaking, so I'll address the broader issue. I'll take it away from the specific. Look, it's a global phenomenon. It's I think we are now in an environment where I think after every contested large electoral event, the lens will always be put on the electoral management body. And you look at that in Western Australia at the moment. Now, that wasn't a close election, and it's happening there too. So I suspect that part of this is the new normal. Now, for me, I think the way we have to meet that is not by resisting that, is not by saying, look, there's no need for you to look at this, we're fine here, because that's not a valid argument for me to make. For me, the way we respond to that is we welcome the scrutiny, we increase the level of transparency that we have. It's already extremely transparent. The level of scrutiny that is placed on us is rightly very high. And I think what we do is we just look for more and more opportunities to make it higher and higher and higher. That's one thing. And the other thing is we have to just keep delivering to the highest possible standards. You know, in the video, every vote counts. And you should see how the VEC reacts during an electoral event if something doesn't tally, if something's out by one. You know, we go, oh my God, we have to find this. We have to rectify this. We have to go start again. I mean, the numbers of recount, well, not recounts, that's a very technical term, rechecks that happen as a matter of course, and sometimes recounts, which are a different but related thing, just has to stand up to any level of scrutiny. And the same sort of things that maybe 10 years ago had always been happening. This was out a little bit, this was out a little bit, et cetera, et cetera. It didn't affect the result, et cetera. People would sort of put up with that. And now we're in the position where I think most people would still put up with that, but not everyone. And so therefore we just have to be above reproach. We've got to deliver to an incredibly high standard, and we've got to be as transparent as we can possibly be in everything we do. And just more and more and more of that. I think that's the only thing we can do to that.
I'm going to
add to that if I can.
Yes, certainly.
So our electoral commissions do have an enviable reputation. They rank very highly in terms of public trust, I think in the 90s. But more recently, we've seen politicians more willing to go for the electoral commissions, which is a shame. Like Peter Dutton attacked the Australian Electoral Commission in the Voice referendum, even though, you know, we know that it's an independent institution. But this willingness, the new willingness, I think, of political participants to attack our independent institutions is something that is quite new and troubling. And we've seen the global trends where, misinformation and disinformation is spread widely from the US, it comes into Australia, and that leads to fringe groups like the sovereign citizens and conspiracy theorists that one of the electoral commissioners said that these kind of peoples were attacking electoral commission staff at the polling booths, and they needed to put in a law in New South Wales to prohibit the harassment of electoral commission staff. So I think that we're seeing partly a global issue, as Sven said, but also increased willingness for our own political participants to use independent institutions as a political football, and that is something that is quite shameful. But we persist, we carry on, and we keep trying to improve our democracy.
And you must never give up. But I just have one quick question, if people don't mind. Yee-Fui, of your wonderful recommendations, how many do you think will actually be implemented realistically?
Oh, that's difficult. So I made a range of recommendations in my report. I guess for the South Australian and ACT laws, I think they're working well. I would remove the temporal limits that just restricted to ads that seek to influence an outcome of an election. As one of the interviewees says, that means you can lie, 3 years and 9 months out of 4 years. So I would remove that temporal limitation and disallow ads that lie at any point. And I would update the laws to reflect deceptive and malicious AI and deepfakes, because, as I said, those laws were written when we had telegraph cables and, a long time ago. So we do need to account for technological developments in communication. I think that can be quite easily done in terms of amending those existing laws. And the ACT is reviewing how the laws went for the first time. So potentially that might be an avenue. As to whether other jurisdictions pick up the laws, big question mark. So the Commonwealth did put forward a bill, but that failed to get up because the opposition didn't support it. So we've seen some legislative efforts at the Commonwealth level that stalled. There's talk in Victoria and Queensland about introducing these laws, but we're not quite sure whether that will push on to reality. But there is increasingly momentum, I think, for these kinds of laws. And we've seen a model in South Australia and the ACT where it is very successful. So who knows, hopefully.
On that hopeful note, unfortunately, we're going to have to bring it to a close. We've gone a little over time, and I'm sure we could have stood here for another hour and debated, but I would just like to thank our two distinguished speakers for what has been a most interesting and informative, and I think everybody here is much wiser as a result of your presentation. So, Sven and Yee-Fui, thank you very much on behalf of the ASPG, and everybody, please join me in showing our appreciation.